The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete training grounds of Naval Base Coronado as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the transport vehicle. At 24 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her slight frame almost lost in the standard-issue training uniform that seemed 2 sizes too large. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her brown eyes held a quiet determination that most people missed at first glance. The other recruits were already gathered in formation, their voices carrying across the yard in hushed conversations. Sarah could feel their eyes on her as she approached, taking in her appearance with barely concealed amusement. She had grown accustomed to these looks over the years, the subtle smirks, the raised eyebrows, the way conversations seemed to pause when she entered a room. "Well, well, what do we have here?" came a voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with sandy blonde hair and the kind of confident swagger that suggested he had never doubted his place in the world. This was Jake Thompson, a former college football player who had joined the Navy after graduation. His uniform fit perfectly across his muscular frame, and he wore it like armor. "Looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now," Jake continued, loud enough for the nearby recruits to hear. A few of them chuckled, their laughter sharp in the morning air. "I mean, no offense, but are you sure you're in the right place? The administrative offices are back that way." Sarah said nothing, simply adjusted her gear bag on her shoulder and continued walking. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only encouraged them, but her silence seemed to embolden Jake and his growing audience. "Come on, I'm just saying," Jake pressed on, falling into step beside her. "This is supposed to be elite training. We're talking about the most demanding physical and mental challenges the Navy has to offer. Maybe you should consider something more suitable." Behind them, more recruits had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. There was Marcus Chen, a former track athlete with Olympic aspirations who had joined the military for structure and discipline. Lisa Rodriguez, a former police officer who wanted to serve her country on a larger scale. David Kim, a computer science graduate who had been recruited for his technical skills but was required to complete the same physical training as everyone else. "I heard they have quotas now," whispered someone from the back of the group. "You know, for diversity and all that." "Yeah, but this is ridiculous," another voice added. "She looks like a strong wind could knock her over." The comments continued to flow, each one building on the last. They spoke about her as if she weren't there, as if she were some curiosity to be examined and dismissed. Some questioned whether the standards had been lowered. Others wondered aloud how she had even made it through basic training. A few suggested she must have connections or special treatment. Sarah kept walking, her expression unchanged. She had heard variations of these same comments throughout her life, in high school when she wanted to join the wrestling team, in college when she chose to study mechanical engineering, during her previous military training when instructors assumed she would wash out in the first week. The words stung as they always did, but she had developed thick skin over the years. The group reached the main training facility, a massive complex of buildings and obstacle courses that would become their home for the next several months. Drill Sergeant Morrison, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything, stood waiting for them. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Line up," he barked, his voice cutting through the morning chatter like a knife. The recruits scrambled into formation, their previous confidence suddenly replaced by nervous energy. This was what they had all come for, the chance to prove themselves in one of the military's most challenging programs. As they stood at attention, Sarah could feel the continued stares of her fellow recruits. She heard the whispered comments, saw the sideways glances, felt the weight of their expectations, or rather, their lack thereof. They had already written her off, dismissed her as unfit for the challenges ahead. In their minds, she was a mistake, an oversight, someone who would be gone within days. Jake Thompson stood 2 positions to her right, his chest puffed out with confidence. He had been telling anyone who would listen about his athletic background, his college achievements, his natural leadership abilities. In his mind, programs like this were designed for people like him, strong, capable, proven winners. He couldn't understand why the military would waste time and resources on someone who so clearly didn't belong. The other recruits shared similar thoughts. They had all come here believing they were special, that their backgrounds and abilities made them natural fits for elite training. Most had been standout athletes, top students, or high achievers in their previous careers. They looked at Sarah and saw everything they were not: small, quiet, unremarkable. In their minds, her presence somehow diminished their own accomplishments. Drill Sergeant Morrison began his opening remarks, outlining the challenges that lay ahead. He spoke of grueling physical tests, mental challenges that would push them to their breaking points, and the high failure rate that had become legendary among military personnel. As he talked, Sarah noticed several recruits stealing glances in her direction, their expressions mixing amusement with pity. "The next few months will separate the wheat from the chaff," Morrison continued, his eyes scanning the formation. "Many of you will not make it through the first week. Others will last longer but ultimately discover that you don't have what it takes. Only a select few will earn the right to call themselves part of this elite unit." The words sent a chill through the group, but also heightened the competitive atmosphere. Each recruit was sizing up the others, trying to determine who would be their primary competition and who would likely wash out early. The consensus seemed clear when it came to Sarah. She would be among the first to go. As the morning briefing concluded and the recruits were dismissed to their barracks, the whispered conversations resumed with renewed intensity. Sarah found herself walking alone, several steps behind the main group, listening to their predictions about who would succeed and who would fail. Her name came up frequently in the latter category, often accompanied by laughter and exaggerated expressions of disbelief. "I give her 3 days, Max," Jake was saying to a cluster of admirers. "Maybe less if they start with anything physical. I mean, look at her. I could probably bench press twice her body weight." The comment drew more laughter from the group, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly. She had worked too hard and come too far to let their ignorance affect her focus. But as she settled into her bunk that night, surrounded by the confident chatter of her fellow recruits, she couldn't help but feel the familiar weight of having to prove herself all over again. Tomorrow would bring their first real test, and Sarah knew that everyone would be watching, waiting for her to fail, expecting confirmation of their preconceived notions. They had no idea who she really was, where she had come from, or what she was truly capable of. In their minds, she was just another recruit who didn't belong, someone who would provide an easy comparison to make themselves look better. They had made their judgments based on appearances, assumptions, and prejudices. In less than 24 hours, they would discover just how wrong they had been. The alarm sounded at 500 hours, piercing the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. Recruits tumbled from their bunks in various states of readiness, some having barely slept due to nerves, others jolting awake from deep sleep. Sarah had been awake for 30 minutes already, having trained herself over years of military service to wake naturally before any alarm. She was already dressed and making her bunk when the others began their frantic scramble. "First evaluation begins in 20 minutes, Drill Sergeant Morrison's voice boomed through the barracks. "Full gear, training ground Alpha. Anyone who's late starts the day with extra laps." The training ground was a sprawling complex designed to test every aspect of military readiness. Obstacle courses wound through simulated combat environments, while specialized equipment waited to measure strength, endurance, speed, and tactical thinking. As the recruits assembled in the gray morning light, Sarah noticed the continued clustering of her peers. They moved in groups, naturally gravitating toward others they deemed worthy of association. Jake Thompson had positioned himself at the front of the formation, his confidence undiminished by the early hour. He had spent the previous evening regaling anyone who would listen with stories of his college football days, his impressive bench press numbers, and his natural leadership abilities. In his mind, today would simply confirm what everyone already knew, that he was destined for success in this program. Today we begin with basic physical assessments, Morrison announced, his voice carrying easily across the assembled group. Pull-ups, push-ups, distance running, and obstacle navigation. These aren't just numbers on a chart. They're indicators of whether you have the foundational fitness required for advanced training. Behind Morrison, several other instructors had taken positions around the training area. Each carried clipboards and stopwatches, their expressions professionally neutral, but their eyes sharp and evaluating. Sarah recognized the look. She had seen it countless times before, in other training facilities, other evaluation scenarios, other moments when she was expected to fail. The first test was pull-ups, and recruits were called forward alphabetically. Sarah watched as Jake approached the bar with the swagger of someone who had never doubted his physical abilities. His form was textbook perfect, his breathing controlled, and his repetitions smooth and consistent. He completed 23 pull-ups before dropping to the ground, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not bad, Thompson," one of the instructors noted, making a mark on his clipboard. "Solid performance." Other recruits followed, each displaying varying levels of competence. Marcus Chen, the former track athlete, managed 19 repetitions with excellent form. Lisa Rodriguez, drawing on her police training experience, completed 16 before her grip finally failed. David Kim struggled more, managing only 8 repetitions before dropping exhaustedly to the ground. As they worked through the alphabet, Sarah could feel the anticipation building among the other recruits. They were waiting for her turn, eager to see confirmation of their assumptions. She caught fragments of whispered conversations, bets being placed on whether she could even complete 5 repetitions, speculation about how quickly she would wash out of the program. "Martinez, Sarah," Morrison called out, his voice betraying no emotion. "You're up." Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Behind her, she could hear Jake Thompson's voice carrying over the morning air. "This should be entertaining. I'm betting she can't even hang from the bar for 10 seconds. The laughter that followed was quiet but unmistakable, and Sarah felt it like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. She approached the pull-up bar with steady steps, her expression unchanged. The metal was cold against her palms as she gripped it, positioning her hands precisely shoulder-width apart. What happened next would be burned into the memory of every person present for years to come. Sarah's first pull-up was smooth and controlled, her chin clearing the bar with room to spare. Her second was identical, with no visible strain or struggle. By her 5th repetition, the casual conversations had stopped. By her 10th, the training ground had fallen completely silent, except for the sound of her controlled breathing. Jake Thompson's confident smile had vanished, replaced by a look of growing confusion and disbelief. The other recruits stood frozen, watching as Sarah continued her steady rhythm. 15 repetitions, 20, 25. Her form remained perfect, her breathing steady, her movements precise and economical. At 30 repetitions, several recruits began exchanging uncertain glances. This wasn't what they had expected, wasn't what they had prepared for mentally. The small, quiet woman they had dismissed as unsuitable was performing at a level that surpassed most of their own efforts. 35, 40, 45. Drill Sergeant Morrison had stopped making notes and was now watching intently, his professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine interest. The other instructors had gathered closer, drawn by the unusual sight of a recruit who seemed capable of continuing indefinitely. 50 repetitions, 55, 60. Jake Thompson's mouth had fallen open, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Around him, the other recruits watched in stunned silence as Sarah continued her methodical progression. There was something almost mechanical about her performance, as if she had done this exact exercise thousands of times before. At 70 repetitions, Sarah finally slowed her pace slightly, but showed no signs of stopping. Her breathing remained controlled, her form unchanged. It was becoming clear to everyone present that she wasn't approaching her limit. She was demonstrating it by choice. 75. 80. 85. The silence on the training ground was now complete, broken only by the rhythmic sound of Sarah's movements and breathing. Even the instructors had stopped their usual chatter, focusing entirely on the unexpected performance unfolding before them. At 90 repetitions, Sarah paused for just a moment, hanging from the bar with perfect stillness. Then, with the same controlled precision she had displayed throughout, she completed her 90th pull-up and dropped lightly to the ground. Her landing was silent, balanced, and she immediately assumed the position of attention as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The silence stretched on for several seconds, no one quite sure how to process what they had witnessed. 90 pull-ups was a performance that would have been impressive for any male recruit, let alone someone of Sarah's size and apparent fitness level. It was a number that exceeded military standards by such a wide margin that it suggested something far beyond normal training and preparation. Drill Sergeant Morrison was the first to speak, his voice carefully neutral despite the clear surprise in his eyes. 90 repetitions, Martinez. Outstanding performance. He made a note on his clipboard, but his movement was slower than usual, as if he was still processing what he had witnessed. As Sarah returned to her position in the formation, she could feel the shift in atmosphere around her. The casual dismissal had been replaced by confusion and uncertainty. The recruits who had been making jokes about her capabilities just minutes before now avoided making eye contact, unsure of how to reconcile what they had just witnessed with their preconceived notions. Jake Thompson stood in particular shock, his entire worldview suddenly called into question. He had built his identity around being the strongest, the most capable, the natural leader in any physical competition. Sarah's performance had shattered that assumption completely, leaving him grappling with the realization that he had fundamentally misjudged not just her capabilities, but the entire situation. The remaining physical tests proceeded in an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Sarah's push-up performance was equally stunning, a perfectly controlled demonstration that seemed to defy the normal limitations of human endurance. Her distance running was worse than outstanding. It was almost supernatural in its consistency and speed. But it was during the obstacle course navigation that the full scope of the mystery began to reveal itself. As Sarah approached the complex series of barriers, walls, and challenges, something changed in her movement pattern. The careful, measured steps of a cautious recruit were replaced by something else entirely. Fluid, efficient, and unmistakably professional. She moved through the obstacles like someone who had encountered them before, not just in training but in real-world applications. Her technique was too polished, too refined for someone experiencing these challenges for the first time. Every movement suggested muscle memory built through years of practice, combat experience, and specialized training that went far beyond anything a typical recruit would possess. As she completed the course in a time that shattered the existing record, the gathered instructors and recruits finally began to understand that they had made a fundamental error in their assessment. Sarah Martinez was not a struggling recruit, trying to prove herself worthy of elite training. She was something else entirely, someone whose presence in their program represented a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. The revelation came exactly 40 seconds after Sarah completed the obstacle course, when Drill Sergeant Morrison received an urgent call on his secured communication device. As he listened to the voice on the other end, his expression shifted from professional curiosity to complete bewilderment, and finally to something approaching awe. "Hold all evaluations," Morrison commanded, his voice carrying a new authority that caused every recruit and instructor to freeze immediately. "Everyone maintain positions until further notice." Sarah remained where she had stopped after completing the course, her breathing already returned to normal, her posture relaxed but alert. She seemed unsurprised by the sudden halt in proceedings, as if she had been expecting this moment. Around her, the other recruits exchanged confused glances, still trying to process the morning's unexpected developments. Morrison approached Sarah with deliberate steps, his entire demeanor transformed. Where minutes before he had addressed her as just another recruit, now there was unmistakable respect in his bearing. He stopped directly in front of her and, to the absolute shock of everyone present, rendered a crisp, military salute. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," he said formally, his voice carrying across the silent training ground. "My apologies for the oversight in your classification. Command has just informed me of the situation." The words hit the assembled group like a physical blow. "Lieutenant Commander," the rank designation meant that Sarah wasn't just an experienced military member. She was a senior officer with years of service and specialized training. More importantly, she outranked every person on the training ground, including several of the instructors. Jake Thompson felt his legs go weak as the implications crashed down upon him. Every joke, every dismissive comment, every assumption he had made suddenly took on a horrifying new context. He had been mocking a superior officer, someone whose rank and experience dwarfed his own non-existent military credentials. The confident swagger that had carried him through the morning dissolved into pure mortification. "There seems to have been an administrative error," Morrison continued, speaking directly to Sarah but clearly intending his words for everyone present. "Your records were initially filed under a training classification rather than your actual status as a visiting instructor and observer." Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and professional. "The error was intentional, Sergeant Morrison. I requested the anonymous classification to observe standard recruit behavior and evaluation procedures without the influence of rank recognition." The statement sent another wave of shock through the group. Not only was Sarah a senior officer, but her presence in their training program had been a deliberate test or evaluation. She hadn't been trying to prove herself worthy of their program. She had been evaluating them, assessing their character, their professionalism, their ability to work with diverse team members. "Ma'am," Morrison responded, his formality now complete. "What are your instructions regarding the continuation of evaluations?" Sarah looked around the training ground, her gaze moving systematically from recruit to recruit, instructor to instructor. When her eyes met Jake's, he felt himself shrink under the weight of her attention. Every word he had spoken, every assumption he had made, was now revealed in its full, embarrassing context. "I think we can proceed with normal evaluations," Sarah said finally. "However, I would like to address the group first, if I may." Morrison stepped back, effectively turning control of the situation over to the ranking officer. Sarah moved to the center of the formation, positioning herself where everyone could see and hear her clearly. The transformation in her bearing was remarkable. Gone was any pretense of uncertainty or deference, replaced by the confident presence of someone accustomed to command. "Over the past 18 hours," she began, her voice carrying easily across the silent group, "I have observed behavior and heard comments that concern me greatly. Not because of what they reveal about my own capabilities, but because of what they demonstrate about your readiness for elite service." The words were delivered without anger or condemnation, but their impact was devastating. Every recruit who had participated in the morning's mockery felt the weight of their failure settling upon them. "Elite military service requires absolute trust in your teammates," Sarah continued. It demands the ability to look beyond surface appearances and recognize capability wherever it exists. Most importantly, it requires the professional maturity to treat all personnel with respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived limitations. Jake Thompson wanted to disappear into the ground. Every principle of leadership and teamwork that he claimed to understand had been violated in his treatment of Sarah. Worse still, he had influenced others to join in his unprofessional behavior, demonstrating exactly the kind of judgment that would be dangerous in real-world military operations. My background includes 8 years of active duty service, including 2 deployments in special operations environments, Sarah continued, providing context that made her morning's performance finally make sense. I currently serve as a training coordinator for advanced tactical programs, which is why I was assigned to observe this selection process. The revelation explained everything: her extraordinary physical performance, her familiarity with the obstacles, her calm confidence throughout the morning's events. She hadn't been struggling to meet their standards. She had been operating at a level far beyond what any of them could achieve. The purpose of my presence here was to evaluate not just your physical capabilities, but your character, your ability to work as part of a diverse team, and your readiness for the challenges of elite service, Sarah explained. Based on this morning's observations, several of you have demonstrated attitudes and behaviors that would be problematic in real-world operations. The implication was clear without being stated directly. Some of the recruits had failed the test before the formal evaluations had even begun. Their dismissive attitudes, unprofessional comments, and willingness to exclude a teammate based on superficial characteristics had revealed fundamental flaws in their character. Sarah's gaze found Jake again, and this time she addressed him directly. Recruit Thompson, your athletic background and physical capabilities are impressive. However, your assumption that strength and size are the primary indicators of military effectiveness suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of modern warfare and team dynamics. Jake felt heat rising in his face, but forced himself to meet her eyes. Ma'am, I apologize for my unprofessional conduct. There's no excuse for my behavior. You're correct that there's no excuse, Sarah replied evenly. But there is an opportunity to learn from this experience. Elite military service requires leaders who can recognize and utilize the capabilities of all team members, not just those who fit traditional stereotypes. She turned to address the broader group again. The most effective military units I've served with have been composed of individuals with diverse backgrounds, capabilities, and perspectives. Physical strength is important, but it's only one factor among many. Intellectual capability, technical expertise, cultural knowledge, language skills, and emotional intelligence are all equally valuable in different situations. The lecture continued for several more minutes, each point driving home the magnitude of the morning's failure in judgment. Sarah spoke about real-world operations where success had depended on team members who didn't fit traditional military stereotypes. She described situations where assumptions and prejudices had led to mission failures and endangered lives. As she concluded her remarks, Sarah announced that formal evaluations would continue, but with a new understanding of what was actually being assessed. Physical performance remained important, but equal weight would be given to character, teamwork, and professional behavior. The remaining hours of evaluation proceeded in a dramatically different atmosphere. The casual conversations and confident predictions were replaced by serious focus and mutual respect. Recruits who had previously dismissed each other based on appearances now watched each performance with genuine interest and encouragement. Jake Thompson's own performance, while still impressive in absolute terms, felt hollow in the new context. His physical capabilities hadn't changed, but his understanding of what truly mattered in elite service had been fundamentally altered. He found himself watching Sarah throughout the day, trying to understand how someone could possess such extraordinary capabilities while maintaining such professional humility. As the day concluded and recruits were dismissed to their barracks, The conversations were markedly different from those of the previous evening. Instead of confident predictions about who would succeed or fail, there was genuine uncertainty about what the selection process actually required. Sarah remained on the training ground as the others departed, reviewing notes with Morrison and the other instructors. Her evaluation of the day's events would become part of the permanent record for each recruit, influencing not just their progression through the current program, but their future assignments and career development. For those who had demonstrated professional behavior and sound judgment, her report would be overwhelmingly positive. For others, particularly those who had shown prejudice and unprofessional conduct, her assessment would note areas requiring significant improvement before they could be trusted with elite responsibilities. The lesson of that day would be remembered by everyone present for the remainder of their careers. They had learned that true capability often comes in unexpected packages, that assumptions based on appearance can be dangerously wrong, and that professional character is just as important as physical performance in determining who deserves the privilege of elite service. Most importantly, they had discovered that the woman they had mocked as unsuitable for their program was actually the standard by which their own worthiness would be measured. In 40 seconds, everything they thought they knew about capability, leadership, and military excellence had been completely transformed.